All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the May 10th, 2022 Policy and Services Committee meeting. If the clerk can take the roll.
Sure. Chair Stone?
Here.
Councilmember Cormack? Here. Councilmember Tanaka?
Here.
For the record, all present.
Great, thank you. Let's start with oral communications from the public. Anything that is not on the agenda tonight? We'll go with 3 minutes, please.
We have one speaker in public.
Great. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you. Good evening. So I'm very dismayed that in 3 years of asking this committee to put airplane noise and update to residents on your agenda, and therefore also advise full council, you haven't. And residents are completely unaware of what the city is doing with the GBAS project because you just host meetings and put San Francisco Airport on there. So the last meeting that the city hosted for SFO raised huge problems. And the community deserves to be aware of all of the problems with the process, with everything that's been going on, with the serious conflicts of interest. And it deserves a transparent answer from all of you. I have said this before as well in writing so many times, since the assistant city manager who was staffed to address airplane noise is gone, it's unclear who's running this issue on airplane noise, which is very important. And there's so many misunderstandings, even from the people who have been following this from the beginning. At the last GBAS meeting, for example, 2 residents were surprised somehow that the true innovative procedures are not going to be presented when in October of 2020, I went back to check the meeting. SFO is very clear. You had the overlays, you had the so-called innovatives, and then you have what many people have referred to, and just at the last meeting, futuristic, esoteric procedures for which the FAA does not have criteria to even input into the IFP gateway. That's a 10-year plan. And yet, people are surprised that somehow they can't show the full benefits of GBAS when it was obvious. I mean, my hair went up in fire in October 2020. Wrote to Representative Eshu, wrote to all of you, wrote to SFO. And we have been writing to the SFO Roundtable, to everybody. You know how it's always how the FAA doesn't listen? Well, I'm a little checklist of how my own representatives have not been listening. And yet, all of this is going, with very few people. Even the SFO Roundtable meetings, they are for interested parties. SFO says they're talking to Bay Area residents. No, they're not. They are speaking. And I'm just disappointed because actually 2 members of this committee, Mr. Tanaka and Mr. Stone, responded when they were getting elected that they were going to make sure that citizens are heard. Well, you're not. And I think this needs to be put on an agenda very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Landesman. Next speaker. Christian Beauvoir. Apologies if I misstate your name.
No, that was pretty solid. I'm so sorry. I had some troubles joining in. Is this the discussion and recommendation to join the California Community Housing Agency conversation?
No, that is our next item. This is oral communications for anything that's not on the agenda, but we'll be taking that up right after this.
So sorry.
Not a
I'll wait
problem.
for that.
Okay, thank you. Any other speakers? All right, well then let's move to our first action item, a discussion and recommendation to the City Council to join the California Community Housing Agency. Does staff have a presentation?
Good evening, council members. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Rachel Tanner, Assistant Director of Planning and Development Services. I will be giving a brief oral presentation today and open it up for discussion to the committee members. Just want to start by acknowledging that unfortunately members of the California Community Housing Authority were not able to join at the last minute this evening. We were expecting them and some things came up and they're not able to be with us tonight. So we will do a high-level overview of the organization and the JPA and kind of what benefits and kind of challenges it might pose for the city. Love to have discussion, and if the committee would like to hear it again when they can be present, we can certainly arrange a date and time for the item to come back when the members from the JPA can be there, and the staff will their staff will obviously have more details, perhaps than what I'll be able to relay to you. So just want to begin with that kind of disclosure. Excuse me. And I'll be doing a brief oral presentation today just to kind of go over what is the California Community Housing Agency and what does it do. So the mission of the California Community Housing Agency and kind of its role is to produce, preserve, and protect middle-income housing. And they use an essential housing model that already has created income-restricted units in California and throughout the state of California in different jurisdictions. It's a joint powers authority, and so different jurisdictions join as a member of the joint powers authority that allows CalCHA to then evaluate potential purchases of existing housing products and housing developments within that jurisdiction for conversion to this middle income housing. And that middle income housing can go up to 120% of the area median income, but it can also reach down to 80% of area median income. So it really can have a spread of incomes and households with different incomes living within that housing development. They are again purchasing existing housing units, and then over time, as tenants leave, as they have a no displacement policy, the new tenants would need to be income qualified to have incomes within the area median income bands that the housing is serving. How do they purchase the housing? The CalCHA issues government bonds, and those project-specific bonds are then paid back out of the revenues that are generated from the rents paid in the project. And one thing that also happens is, as a government entity, CalCHA is granted 100% property tax exemption for each property that it acquires. So while the transaction doesn't cost the city directly, and that the city doesn't have to be involved in the issuances of the bonds or do anything directly in the purchase, the city would not be receiving any property taxes related to that property. And so that would be kind of a cost to the city in terms of reduction of property tax revenue to Palo Alto or to any other jurisdiction that becomes a member, in accordance with the properties that are purchased. And then what else happens in terms of the purchase, the bonds are usually 30 to 35 years. And as the bonds are paid off, the city does have an opportunity to purchase the properties from CalCHA. And so we could, for example, in year 15 to year 30, have the ability to purchase those housing developments. The city could either manage them directly, or we could assign that purchase option to a nonprofit housing provider in our community. And that nonprofit housing provider could then own and operate that housing until the bonds are paid off. And once the bonds are paid off, the nonprofit housing provider could continue to offer it as mixed income housing for middle income households. And then if the city were to take it on ourselves, then we could also receive some of the surplus cash flow that comes from the project in excess of what's needed to service the debt on the project. So far, the CalCHA has completed a number of projects throughout California, including 12 in the Bay Area, and they range in size from 150 to 300 units, and in places in the East Bay and the North Bay, and really kind of all around the Bay Area. There are some other cities who've looked at joining the JPA and have declined. For example, the city of San Jose. There were some concerns that they noted, particularly not that there's no third-party oversight or compliance. And so kind of just questioning how could the city be sure that the JPA is really restricting the tenancy to those income groups that are targeted by the housing. They're a little concerned that the fees that the JPA charges might be a little too high. And also, does the reduction in property tax revenues for the city, is that really balanced out by the rent savings that the tenants would be experiencing? For some households that are at the upper end of the AMI level at 120%, for example, the rents that they pay could be pretty similar to market rate rents. And so those households may not be saving a lot of money. They would, however, have protection from wild increases in their rent. They'd be limited to a maximum of 4% rent increase a year under the JPA's rules. But again, the city would have to kind of weigh, do we think that those reductions in property tax revenues really align with the savings that the tenants would be receiving, which I'm sure many tenants would like to save any money that they can on their rent, and any stability for many could be definitely a plus. We also, bring in this housing units off of the private market. And so those are, and then also just kind of some concerns about, the purchase offers, obviously payment. That said, if there is a property identified within Palo Alto that the JPA is thinking of purchasing, the city does have the right to say yay or nay to that purchase. So we could, if we were to become members, and CalCHA did identify a property that they thought they might purchase, they looked at the numbers, looked good, the city would be involved and be able to say, yes, we, would support going ahead with this purchase, or no, we're not supportive of going ahead with the purchase of that property. So that's the high level overview that I can provide to you, and I'll be available for any questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you. There's no other staff presentation, then we'll move on to public comment for this item. All right, Mr. Beauvoir, now it's your turn.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. My name is Christian Beauvoir. I'm representing the Palo Alto Renters Association today. And we wanted to join in and say that we support Palo Alto joining the California Community Housing Agency. Middle income housing means more homes for teachers, for public service workers, and all the folks commuting into Palo Alto, but who are also at risk of losing their place here and having to commute from further and further distances. We're hearing from renters in Palo Alto that there's two big problems that they're experiencing, among a myriad of others, but they're constantly getting priced out as the cost of renting increases. And then once they're priced out or forced out, they're unable to find new places in their price range. Palo Alto needs to take on any effort it can to protect affordable housing. And we see this as a really good way to make that possible. We also recognize that joining the California Community Housing Agency is just the first step. And we have a lot more work to do to actually acquire and build and protect affordable housing in Palo Alto. As the city considers whether to join, we do hope that you all are really thinking about, like, how does this sit within a larger landscape of protecting renters and making Palo Alto a better place for renters to live, where we can better support our community. So how will these policies change and impact tenants? How will the city help fund and improve these efforts in alignment with other efforts that they're making? Are we building the political will to actually make the community better for tenants? And those are just some of the things that we're thinking of in this moment, but generally we hope that City Council adopts this as one of the many larger efforts to protect renters, to keep people in the community, and to protect against harassment and rent increases for a long period of time. And that's my time.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Beauvoir. If there's no more public comments, then we will come back to council for discussion. All right, Councilmember Cormack.
Thank you, Chair Stone, and thank you to staff for bringing this forward. I remember when this organization approached me And I thought it was worthy of our consideration. So I'm really happy to see it here today. I appreciate the public comments about this being part of the landscape. And I think in the understandable impetus to really focus on affordable housing, we may not have focused enough on the people right in the middle of the income spectrum. And so I'm particularly interested in the fact that, as the potential resolution states, no existing federal, state, or local subsidies, programs, or motivations currently exist to meaningfully address the growing shortfall of protected middle income rental housing. So I guess I don't know how many of these questions staff is going to be able to answer. One of them is about the board of the JPA. Sometimes when we join a JPA, someone needs to serve on a board. Anything we know about this particular board and how it would function?
That is a great question. I do not know the answer, but I will take down all your questions as well, so we can either when it comes back here or just depending what you all decide, we can get the answers for you.
Okay. I think I recall that we did not have to serve. I remember looking at this some time ago, but it's always just good for us to understand the governance of any organization that we're participating in. Good to know that we can review any potential purchases. Thank you for the description of the bonds. And of course, this doesn't have any cost or create an obligation. I am interested in staff's response to some of the concerns that San Jose had. No third party to oversee ongoing income compliance. Like, do we have a third party that oversees Alta Housing or Eden Housing or Abode or any of the others? How is that part of that usual process?
We certainly do have reporting that those organizations provide to the city about the BMR housing, as well as when sales happen, we are part of monitoring that. So there's a bit more involvement typically with the city and those affordable housing units. Okay.
And then the reduction in property tax revenues, I think it'd be good to just have an example. So I see that, some of these where they've done 150 to 300 units, it'd be helpful if staff could locate a few similarly sized properties in Palo Alto and let us know how much they're paying in property taxes. I think that would give us a sense of how much does that rate on the $58 million we expect to receive in property taxes this year. My guess is it's a pretty small amount for filling what I think is probably a hole in terms of our rental properties.
Yeah, and just one example I do have somewhat related, but I think it's a great point to kind of look at an actual Palo Alto property, understand how much are they paying in property taxes anyways, and then to imagine foregoing our city's portion of that revenue. I know in the city of Long Beach, they did an evaluation where they evaluated a potential purchase through the CalCHA program, and they estimated that the city would forego about over the life of the bond into the life of that project, and the tenants would save about $1 million possibly on rent. So that was kind of one way to think about a comparison between the property tax revenue and then the rent savings for the tenants. But we can certainly look at a Palo Alto example as well.
Okay, and that's helpful, but I think we also have to distinguish between the sheer cost trade-offs and the fact that it would be protected in terms of not being able to increase at a fast rate, and then also potentially be something that is available to the city to purchase, which we would never have the funds to do, at the beginning of the process. I think this is a really interesting option for us to consider. And I'm certainly supportive of us either moving it forward to the council, or if my colleagues feel we need to continue it and have it come back and answer a few questions and get to meet the people, I'd be supportive of that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Tanaka?
So I was kind of curious, why exactly do they need our approval? Because it looks like we're not necessarily party to the transactions. There's no obligation incurred by this. So why does it come to us?
So to be active in a jurisdiction, the jurisdiction needs to be a member of the JPA. And so they only purchase properties in their member jurisdictions. So that's why they would need us to be supportive and become a member. I don't know if that answers your question.
It just seems like there's no obligation incurred by doing this, right? There's at least not that I could tell, or is there? Is there something I'm missing?
There's no financial obligation, I mean, other than the property tax revenue being foregone. And so I think certainly you wouldn't want an organization just buying up properties and taking away tax revenue without the city being aware or supportive of that.
Okay. So, so that's actually a good point, the property tax. So do we have an estimate of how much that would be? Like, and this is only property tax to Palo Alto, also to the county as well.
So the property becomes 100% tax exempt for property taxes as an affordable housing and a government kind of entity. And so I think similar to Councilmember Cormack's question, we could get some examples of like what that would look like in Palo Alto, if a housing development were to be purchased and become, tax exempt.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I would like to see that as well. Just an estimate as to what is the financial impact, because property tax is a pretty big chunk of our revenue, but I know, of course, this is probably not going to be that big of a percentage of our housing stock. So, but still be interesting to know how much that will impact us. Thanks.
Kind of following up on both of those thoughts. I mean, does staff have, and probably not, but any thought or estimate on how many properties or units would really need to be acquired by the JPA to really have a significant impact on city revenues? I guess I don't think, I know San Jose was concerned about this, and this is a concern that was raised in the staff report. And I understand that concern, but the JPA has only acquired 13 properties since 2019 in a variety of different jurisdictions. It doesn't seem like they're kind of really focusing on one jurisdiction to make a majority. So I just can't imagine having much property in Palo Alto being purchased by this JPA. So any thoughts on really how many properties, how many units would be required to see any type of significant impact?
I don't know how many would be required to be a significant impact, but I would agree with your assessment that it would be unlikely that they would find suitable properties in Palo Alto at that scale where we would get to a significant concern about property tax revenue. They really focus on, I believe it's like 100 and 150 unit developments are kind of a sweet spot up to around 300, although they have done some smaller and some larger. And so I think the universe of eligible properties is somewhat, limited in Palo Alto. And then of course you have to have a willing seller. So there's a lot of factors that I think would not lead to a huge number of acquisitions in Palo Alto alone, but a few, and those again would be significant for us in terms of our RENA allocation, and again providing that stability for the households that are living there.
Yeah, that's my assessment too. I would imagine that we'll have enough to be able to make an impact for those who really need it, and to be able to move the needle, maybe modestly within RENA, but still move it, and not enough to really have an impact. Especially over the 30-year period. I wasn't clear on the second concern on page 5 of the staff report by San Jose. What does that mean, that compensation is not tied to performance or level of risk taken?
I think part of what I understand that, and this is where I don't quote me on it, but again, this is my understanding, is that part of the way that the JPA is able to generate revenues for itself to pay its staff and to keep the organization going is by charging fees. And so I think the city of San Jose was just thinking that the fees they thought were too high in their estimation, and there was a kind of an annual escalator. And so kind of concerned that, essentially I think it relates to the oversight, like what's the over time assurance that the JPA is going to perform and going to manage the properties well, and to kind of keep them in good standing. It's, I think, in part because, Couch is a newer organization. They do work, I believe, with 2 companies or 2 kind of property management. So they don't necessarily directly manage, but they do staff and manage the properties. So certainly something we could ask them more about. But I believe that's kind of what San Jose was just kind of similar to the ongoing compliance, like concerned, like the JPA is going to be getting revenue from the project, even regardless of how the property is performing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that does. And you've already you've already spoke to this a bit, but does staff have any other just additional thoughts on any of those complications discussed on page 5 as far as how they apply to Palo Alto?
Maybe I'm a little optimistic about it. I think the concerns, certainly we should explore them and be thoughtful. I think part of it is just like, when we have typical affordable housing, kind of maybe in response to Councilmember Cormack's earlier question, there are different mechanisms that are requiring compliance with the affordability requirements. A lot of affordable housing requirements have tax credits or other levels of funding that have certain compliance and performance rules. And so this is than some of the dollars that support the typical affordable housing. And so this is filling that niche, which I think is important. And maybe I have more hope that the JPA does have an incentive to make sure the properties are performing well, because that's how they're going to pay back the bond revenues or the service the debt on the bond. So there is an incentive to keep the property performing, to keep it in good shape, to provide the stable housing to the middle income families. And so again, maybe I'm a little optimistic, and I would want to hear a little bit more from the JPA about how they feel compliance is handled within their organization. They may have some internal checks and balances, and there may be just ways that we can get regular reports from them about what's happening at the properties in our jurisdiction, if they're able to purchase any, that could help to mitigate that concern.
I share your optimism. I think the only area that I had a little concern on was the management of the properties. So as far as the kind of day-to-day management of what a typical landlord would provide, is that Cal CHA that's doing that? If a tenant has an issue, do they have to contact this large bureaucratic agency in Sacramento to get their toilet unplugged or their lights working again? That was a concern of mine.
I think nobody would want that, for sure. And so my understanding is that depending on where the property is located, I believe Southern California, even though there's not that many projects there, they have a property management company. And forgive me, I don't remember if it's a company or a nonprofit organization, but they do have professionals who are doing the day-to-day management. That's who the tenant would experience as their landlord, if for lack of a better word. And they have that experience and expertise to provide the services to the residents.
Good. That makes me feel better. And then one final question. The resolution and the staff report mentions the word production several times, but new housing units are not being produced under this, right? I mean, I guess production would refer to simply converting existing market rate units into below market rate units. That's what production means.
At this time, I do believe there may be some future vision for how the organization could grow to offer more financial products. But at this time, their main product and their main way of operating is through the purchase of existing housing. So maybe in the future, as the organization grows, it will have more offerings that might actually produce net new units in addition to purchasing existing units.
Understood. Thank you. This was helpful. I mean, I'll make a motion. See if I get a second. Then I recommend the City Council adopt the California Community Housing Agency resolution authorizing Palo Alto to become an additional member of the Cal CHA JPA.
I will second that if, on the assumption that staff will answer the questions that we've listed this evening, and those will be incorporated into the staff report. And would staff anticipate, if this passes, that it comes on action?
I am looking virtually at Molly. I think that would be advisable because it would be great to have them here, and it's a pretty big deal to join the JPA. So
yes, I think that's appropriate. Hence my question.
Awesome.
Great, thank you. And yeah, that was my hope as well, especially since we don't have the representatives here tonight. I'll just briefly speak to my motion. I appreciate Mr. Beauvoir and the Palo Alto Rentals Association addressing this issue tonight. I mean, it's no secret that Palo Alto has a dearth of middle income housing, especially when it comes to rental markets. And I kind of shared what Councilmember Tanaka said as far as I struggle to see many negatives on the side of the city. This doesn't commit us to anything, and I think it provides a lot of interesting opportunities. And as a renter myself, who has to kind of sit on the edge of my seat every single year when rent increase comes up, and it always is at the max, a 4% rent increase. For me, it would be a lifesaver, and I can't imagine how many Palo Alto renters would feel across the community. So this is not only going to be able to help tenants at market rate units if these properties are purchased, but also more low-income residents that we desperately need to help. And of course, it's going to help us with our RENA obligations as well. But I think just ultimately the moral obligation to be able to address this need is important, and kind of grateful for what appears to be a state program that's really doing what is necessary, which is actually putting money into acquiring these properties and actually creating deed restricted affordable housing units. So I think this is important, and I do agree. I'm glad this will be going to council for an action item. We can get a few more of these questions answered then. Would you like to speak to your second?
Briefly, yeah. I think that, we can't assume that this will, even if we join the JPA, that they will find a property and purchase it and be able to do it. But I think it's a good option, and it's an entirely possible that there might be, I don't know. Is the JPA technically a nonprofit? Could someone donate a property?
I believe it's a government entity, but I don't know if that forgoes someone from donating. I don't know if it'd be a tax exempt donation. That is beyond my knowledge.
Yeah, I just think we have so much appreciated property here, and it's possible that there might even be avenues that we haven't thought of. So I'm happy to have this as an option, and I'll be interested to see what CalCHA can find here and hopefully provide.
Committee members might suggest, since you've spoken to wanting this to be an action item, you be explicit and make that part of your motion.
Certainly.
So maybe recommend the city council,
Agendize an action item
to adopt. Okay, perfect. Thank you, city manager. Councilmember Tanaka, do you want to speak to the motion?
Yeah, briefly. So I generally I like what you guys are trying to do here. Councilmember Cormack mentioned trying to have on there, and generally, unless we actually make it part of the motion, it's not actually answered. So I don't know whether we need to do that or how do we handle this today. And I don't know which questions are going to be answered, all of them or just some of them, or I thought maybe we could get some clarity on this.
My understanding, if I can jump in on the questions, were related to the numbers, the dollar amounts, and trying to estimate some of the properties. Ms. Tanner, is that where you were planning in terms of your follow-up information?
I have 3 questions. One is the role and kind of the governance of the JPA itself, and if there is either an opportunity or a responsibility for the city to participate in that. Understanding more about potential foregone tax revenue, kind of some example projects. If, a hypothetical, perhaps looking at an actual property in Palo Alto, what would be foregone revenues? And then just third, kind of just confirming the day-to-day property management, who performs that and how that's performed for the tenants that are there. And so I would follow up with the JPA and then incorporate those into the staff report that would go to council and the discussion at the council meeting.
Okay. Okay, that's my only concern. As long as it actually happens, I think it's fine, but sometimes I know questions are not answered. So I just wanted to make sure that we're clear on this.
All right, wonderful. Then if the clerk can call the vote.
Councilmember Tanaka,
Yes.
Councilmember Chair Stone,
Yes.
Councilmember Cormack,
Yes.
motion passed.
All right, thank you, everyone. Moves us on to our second action item, update and potential recommendations on pending state and federal legislation.
Thank you, Chair Stone and committee. Chantel Cotton Gaines, Deputy City Manager. I have with me today our state lobbyist, Nicolo DeLuca, who will provide the state update, and I will give a very high overview of the updates at the federal level. We are going to work to get our federal lobbyists to your next committee for the update. The timing is very difficult when doing virtual for 11 p.m. there. So thank you for your grace. The updates provided by our federal lobbyists have to do mainly with the budget. So as you know, we were awarded in Palo Alto the earmarks from last year's budget, which was adopted well into the fiscal year that it was representing. So we are finding out the next steps on those. One is about the mental health support services. So we're getting more nuances and details on that, as well as the Roth building was one of them with the Palo Alto Museum. And I don't remember the third one, but it will hit me later. So maybe it's just those two. We're actively working on implementation for those. You have a quizzical face. I'll get that question. Yes, that's the mental health one. And then for this upcoming year's budget for FY23 at the federal level, we applied for 2 earmarks as well from the city. We partner with Mid-Penn Housing for one program that is focused on the Palo Alto Gardens housing. It's a lower income housing, and it's focused on electrification of the units as well as installation of some electric vehicle charging. And then the other one is for Fire Station 4, the replacement project. We lowered the dollar amount for Fire Station 4 this year to make it a little bit more competitive to be considered for an earmark. Last year, that was some of the feedback that we received when we submitted Fire Station 4 was it was a large amount. So we just put a partial portion of what we need for Fire Station 4 in as this year's request to both of our senators and also to Congresswoman Eshoo. So we'll see what comes of those. They will go to subcommittees and then the larger appropriations committee from there if they do progress. So we'll keep you all posted on those financial pieces. Then lastly, there are other grant opportunities that are opening up. We have coordinated as staff just some of these top level things that the city needs investment in terms of our infrastructure projects like Fire Station 4 and Newell Bridge. And we're really trying to make sure that we can find funding for the things that are top priorities. So we're focusing our efforts and Van Scoy's efforts in that regard to make sure that we're not just chasing things that may end up being a ton more work for the city and not necessarily the greatest need, and instead really focusing our energy on finding financial support for things that are needs for the city. And with that, I think that concludes the high level things financially from the federal update. And I'll turn it over to Mr. DeLuca, who will give an overview of things of interest for the state.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gaines. Committee members, Nicolo DeLuca, Vice President, Townsend Public Affairs. As you know, we have the honor of representing you all in Sacramento. What I was planning to do was give a high-level overview of where things stand at this very moment in the state capitol. I was then going to go into greater detail on the provided memo, and then happy to answer any questions. So with that said, where we stand in Sacramento, obviously we're in May, so that means a lot of policy committees in the first house have heard bills. That also means as we shift from policy committee hearings, we're now getting a lot closer to budget season. In fact, on Friday, the 13th, the governor will release his May revised budget. As you all know, he introduced his budget in January, and now in May, it's a tighter picture as to what the surplus looks like. And this officially kicks off the discussions between the governor's administration, the Senate, and the Assembly. So Friday, the 13th, the governor will unveil his May revise, and our team will send a nice, crisp summary to the city, and that kicks off the kind of official budget process. About a week or two ago, the Senate Democrats released their budget priorities, and it was very common, very similar to last year's goals of helping addressing the unhoused, rebates to working families, climate resiliency, and things of that nature. So we're shifting from initial first house policy committees, and now we're going to the height of budget season. The memo that's attached highlights 20 bills that are of interest to the city. The reason why we did 20 is some of you all may recall last year with a refined focus. Certainly, there's a lot of pieces of legislation out there that we could look at or summarize, but we wanted to be a little bit tighter, more clear, more targeted. So the attached memo goes into detail on 20 bills. Certainly, we're happy to add bills. We're happy to remove bills, happy to get into that discussion, but it's a more helpful point in time to keep things manageable. What I'm going to do is talk about the open government bills, that there are 3 right now, but then also happy to talk about other pieces of legislation. So with that said, and it's on the first page of the memo, there's really 3 primary bills that talk about open meetings. The first is Assembly Bill 1944 from Assembly Member Lee, and it's titled Local Government Open and Public Meetings. Just last week, this bill cleared its first policy committee, and it's headed towards the Assembly Appropriations Committee. As a backdrop, next Thursday, the 19th, the Assembly Appropriations Committee will be hearing many bills. Some will move forward, some will stay. Obviously, we'll keep the city definitely locked in and looped in as to what the trajectory of these bills are. The focus of Assembly Bill 1944 is to allow members of a legislative body of a local agency to use teleconferencing without identifying each teleconference location in the notice and agenda of the meeting or proceeding, and without making each teleconference location accessible to the public. This bill also has a sunset of January 1, 2030. This bill is supported by a coalition of local government associations such as Urban Counties of California, the League of California Cities, the California State Association of Counties, and the Association of Healthcare Districts. The reason behind supporting this bill, they're saying that it's an important modernization to the Brown Act that protects local elected officials, their location when participating from a non-public remote location, while improving access to members of the public via teleconferencing option. Opposition comes from a coalition of the California News Publishers Association, the ACLU, the First Amendment Coalition, and the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers. Primarily, they're saying they're opposing the bill, which would make fundamental changes to the Brown Act, which enshrining government officials' ability to teleconference from a private location and not make it accessible to the public. So that's one bill that we're watching very closely. And again, it will have its next hearing in the Appropriations Committee next Thursday, the 19th. The second of the 3 bills that we're highlighting on open meetings is Assembly Bill 2449 from Assembly Member Rubio. This one is titled Open Meetings, Local Agencies, Teleconferences. Similar to the bill I just talked about, this bill has moved out of its first policy committee and it's now in the Assembly Appropriations Committee and will also be part of that big hearing on the 19th. The focus of this legislation is to allow members of a legislative body of a local agency to use teleconferencing without identifying each teleconference location in the notice and agenda of the meeting, and also without making each teleconference location accessible to the public if at least a quorum of the members of the body participates in person. So a little bit similar to the bill before, but then different because it talks about having a quorum. Similar to the other bill, this is being supported by some municipal water districts, public agencies. They're the sponsor, and that they were saying that when the governor during the pandemic issued a series of executive orders, of course, there was AB 361. However, that once an emergency declaration has ended, local agencies will again be required to comply with some of these provisions of existing law. So this bill also seeks to help modernize some of the Brown Act provisions. Arguments in opposition also come from the same groups as before: the California News Publishers Association, the ACLU, and the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers. Finally, wrapping up, the third bill related to open meetings is Assembly Bill 2647 from Assembly Member Levine, local government open meetings. Again, similar to the past bills, it's gotten out of its first policy committee hearing. It's headed to the Appropriations Committee hearing on the 19th next week. And the focus of this bill is to allow writings that have been distributed to members of a legislative body of a local agency less than 72 hours before an open meeting to be posted online to satisfy the Brown Act requirements. The sponsor of the bill is the League of California Cities, and this legislation is to address a recent Third District Court of Appeals decision about meeting documents and being online, and how online documentation does not satisfy this requirement of the Brown Act. And for this bill, there's actually no opposition. So with that said, there's a handful of other bills that I can happily discuss, really at the mercy of the committee. Happy to answer any questions you all may have. And thank you. I also would like to add one more thing that Ms. Gaines reminded me of. At the last meeting, we talked about the state surplus and being aggressive on looking at funding opportunities for the city of Palo Alto. We've had some very good discussions with Assemblymember Berman about what some of the city's needs are, flagging Fire Station 4 also as a need for capital improvements. So we continue to work with Assemblymember Berman. The budget process is really quite a long process, and we're just kicking that off now. So I did want to flag that, definitely heard directly from the committee. Obviously, you have a great assembly member and looking to see, and of course, a great senator, and looking to see what type of capital funding we may be able to secure for the city. So with that said, now I'm happy to answer any questions you all may have.
Great, thank you, Mr. DeLuca. Before we get to council discussion, we'll go to the public for any comments. Great, and our first speaker is Ms. Landisman.
Hi, it's me again. And I was hoping that the federal lobbyist would be here today. And so since he isn't, I will go ahead and raise this as just a general governance issue. And maybe the state lobbyist could also be aware of a citizen concern. As everyone is aware, airplane noise is a problem, and the FAA governs all issues regarding airspace matters. And it has certain procedures in considering changes. And for some crazy reason, it has been looking to use airports as representatives of communities. And not just me, but other people, including in Southern California, are not happy about this because and my question is, aren't there ethics issues regarding federal agencies or federal legislators or federal anything interfering with local issues? And it just doesn't make any sense. Now, the airports sit on working committees with the FAA, that's fine, but they cannot act as a voice for communities. And there's also the issue that they turn to their local roundtables to seek acceptance or permission to make changes, but which are affecting people that are outside that jurisdiction. And so, we're all facing this in Northern and Southern California. And my hope with the federal lobbyists was for them to consider whatever the FAA is planning in terms of any policy changes, the enmeshment, or whatever the word is, enmeshment of the FAA with airports in dealing with communities just doesn't make any sense. They're going to have to figure out something else. And then the other issue that I will raise is noise monitors. Funding for noise monitors. It's just incomprehensible that there's so much vacillation. I'm among the people who really thought that maybe the modeling could work since the FAA wants to do that, but since they haven't, we really have to go to full-on noise monitoring, and that needs to be paid by all the great people that are benefiting from all of the airspace changes, and not just leave communities that are not represented currently outside of effective and responsible management of noise and also ultrafine particles. That's a different topic, but I just wanted to raise a problem with conflicts of interest and the way that the FAA is trying to manage noise. And it's not going to work with the airports being our representative. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And we'll return to council for discussion. Councilmember Cormack.
Thank you, Chair Stone. Thank you, Ms. Cotton Gaines, for the overview of the federal approach. That makes sense that we have ratcheted down the fire station 4 to a portion of it. And it's always good to partner with people. So I'm glad we're partnering on the Palo Alto Gardens. I hope that's successful. Mr. DeLuca, thank you for the really detailed report. I think this is a better level of information than when we get the sort of little high level ones and we'd have to go look things up. You did more work for us. I appreciate that. With respect to the open government meetings, I'm sure you'll get a variety of views from the committee. I personally would prefer 2449 over 1944 because it does at least require a quorum to participate. And I think that's better for the public. We are trying to, manage the number of times people can be remote. I certainly do think that it is a benefit to anyone, up on the dais to be able to occasionally take something from home. If they're ill, if they're, going through treatment, if something else is going on and not have to disclose their home address. I think that is a workplace issue that's beneficial, but I see the potential for abuse if someone is repeatedly, not showing up and there's no way for anyone to verify whether or not they're even, occasionally in the jurisdiction. So such an interesting balance. And I appreciate you highlighting that. Obviously no issue with 2647. The one I'd be interested in hearing a little bit more about is our, as you said, wonderful assembly person, Mr. Berman's VTA bill. So does it look like this has gone a little farther than last time and we have more information than we did before?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I compare that to last year's, definitely greater detail about membership, about makeup of the membership. I have not had a chance to speak to his office in great detail about this bill, but definitely by just comparing it from last year's, a lot more detail. And obviously relying on you all for some of the local and regional dynamics involved, but a lot more detail. Something that's interesting to see that at the most recent analysis, there was no formal opposition, and then just highlighting from the grand jury report back in 2004 and 2009, the need for some of these changes, but more detail. As of now, no opposition. Obviously, Assemblymember Berman has been a thorough member, but I would like to connect a little bit more with the staff to kind of get a little bit greater detail on potential amendments and what have you.
Well, I'll just say from my personal experience, seeing 1C44, I think that would be a vast improvement over the way that we have been conducting that particular selection process in recent years. So I'm very pleased to see this. I think it will address a number of the significant governance issues there are at VTA. And, we certainly are going to depend on them for providing some assistance in our area with grade separations. And they're a crucial agency here in our county and responsible for stewarding, great deal of public funds. So I'm very happy to see that one. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Councilmember Tanaka.
Why don't you go ahead first?
Sorry?
You can go first.
Okay, I've got some questions. Well, thank you, Mr. DeLuca, for being here. And as always, your report was very thorough and helpful. A few of my questions have already been answered, so thank you. So if you want to dive into a few that you didn't discuss. So on AB 2011, so this would create a streamlined review process for mixed income housing along commercial corridors. Has it specified which levels of income would be, has it specified which levels of income restrictions would be required?
Yes. Councilmember, I will jump into 2011. I would be remiss, appreciate the compliment on the format of the memo, but I'd be remiss in not mentioning that Ms. Gaines was very helpful in making sure that the format was detailed and thorough, but at the same piece of legislation from Assemblywoman Buffy Wicks. She's East Bay, so Berkeley, Richmond's on Pueblo. This bill is a streamlining bill. It's called the Affordable Housing and High Road Jobs Act of 2022. So ministerial streamlining process for some of the housing that's 100% affordable, but also some market mix income. This bill is being thoroughly discussed, and it's getting a lot of attention in the Capitol. I think the Chronicle just did a story on this. I know her staff well. I've been in a lot of communication with them. When it comes to some of the local government concerns, they're definitely working to address some of them about adopted plans, future plans, things of that nature. There's also been some discussions about levels of income. What's highlighting this bill, one of the main goals of this bill is getting in language in print, and then if signed into law as an example of streamlining legislation and how you interface with the trades, as in whether it's skilled and trained, whether there's the provisions for healthcare. So a lot of this is on streamlining, but over the last few years in the Capitol, a lot of streamlining bills have become contentious due to the lack of language about skilled and trained or apprenticeship programs or things of that nature. Assemblymember Wicks, when she first became the housing chair, so earlier this year, stated this was one of her goals. She wants to work out legislation where the trades, whether it's state construction trades or regional trades, and affordable housing advocates can land on what streamlining language would look like, because over the last few years, many bills have been stalled. So this is an effort to get something in print that everyone can agree upon that will be the new standard. So just as much as it looks like a streamlining bill, there's definitely a backstory to it. Like I mentioned, I think it was a Chronicle just the other day talked about it. The council member, to answer your question directly, I do recall a past discussion was on levels of affordability, and that could change. So while you all discuss, I'm happy to pull up what some of the levels are right now, but this bill is going to go through a handful of changes, also changes as to how it interfaces with cities and their existing specific regional plans and what that would look like.
Okay, thank you. And you covered my next follow-up question on that as far as the new workable labor standards. So that was helpful. One bill I was a little concerned about, AB 2063, kind of question, is the prohibition on charging affordable housing impact fees on bonus units included in the density bonus project, does that only apply to additional BMR units in the density bonus?
That is my understanding, yes. And the waiving the fees is only for affordable units, not for market rate.
Okay. Okay, that's good. Do we have any? I didn't see any representatives from the police department tonight.
They were unable to attend, but we said we'll cover what we can.
Okay, I was just wondering if there was any thoughts on AB 2147 on the jaywalking laws.
Not that we've heard, no. We share that both with our police department as well as our transportation department, or Office of Transportation, excuse me, just so that they're understanding what the bill is. And so I think I had one small response from the transportation office that they would just want to make sure that pedestrian safety is really emphasized, but they didn't have like a specific, this is a terrible bill or anything like that response.
Okay, and it seemed from Mr. DeLuca's report that an officer would be able to cite if pedestrian safety was at risk in the jaywalking. So I thought that seemed like a common sense bill, especially since there's a disproportionate impact on people of color within the state. And I mean, jaywalking, I probably jaywalked coming here. I think everyone does it. Sorry, Molly, I didn't mean to admit that.
No, I'm
good.
just going to interrupt for a moment and say I stop every time. I do not do it in Palo Alto because
don't.
I dread. And don't you dread the potential headline? Council member fill in the blank cited for jaywalking. People know who we are.
I guess so.
It
Okay,
sounds
maybe
like
I'll.
you support this bill quite fervently.
Yeah, I was gonna say, is that a support position involved in this?
Yeah, save me a little time.
Okay. That was already answered.
Councilmember on 2147, this is a reintroduction from Assemblymember Ting. This same bill got to the governor last year and he vetoed it. Obviously, Assemblymember Ting is an astute member and took the governor's veto message to heart. And I suspect around after you clear appropriations in your own house, that's when you traditionally start discussions with the administration on potential changes they may like to see. So curious to see if there'd be any additional amendments.
Okay, thank you. And then just a couple more questions on kind of some of the more miscellaneous bills. AB 1953, I really like that idea, but would that be providing state funding for cities to install water refill stations?
No, that's on your own accord.
All right, well then, I take that back. That seems like that would be expensive.
36 parks.
Yeah.
Chairstone, 36 parks.
As I saw that, I was like, ooh, if there's going to be state funding, that would be great. But okay. Yep, don't like that. And I was curious, and sorry, I didn't record in my notes the number, but as far as camp, the children's camp bill that would require some additional training. I'm curious, are camp counselors and employees currently considered mandated reporters? Does anyone know? Probably one for our Parks Department.
I would imagine that they are just because of their proximity with children, but I can message really quickly and find out.
Yeah, okay. And I guess, so my follow-up then, regardless of what that answer is, then Mr. DeLuca, do you know, would this bill mandate that they would then become mandated reporters?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't have that right away. One sec. I want to get you a better answer, so I'm going to need to get back to you on that.
Yeah, that's fine, and I do think if not, it definitely makes sense to, I would think, to include that in there. I think being a mandated reporter myself as a teacher, I've unfortunately had to make reports and have received the training to be able to make that assessment. And I think that's a really powerful, important tool to prevent child abuse. So hopefully maybe that's something that we can follow up on and possibly advocate for.
And I did want to note on that bill, Ms. O'Kane did do some analysis and just reading through it, and she pointed out that the bill would also require local agencies to inspect children's camps within the jurisdiction. So that could have a resource impact for us locally, just sharing that it would be an added step that they don't currently do.
Yeah.
To that degree.
I would imagine, but I think an important one that I think we should be doing regardless if that bill passes or not. Okay, I think that's it. As just then one final question, I guess, for staff, because I know we have guidelines then for what staff is going to kind of automatically, I guess, draft a statement of support on behalf of the city. Are there particular bills flagged here that under those guidelines we would be automatically supporting?
Yeah, I think some of the bills naturally fall under the guidelines and some may be a step beyond, but if there is consensus over which bills this committee has an interest in, we can do a quick review, and any ones that are beyond what the guidelines allow, we'll just bring it to the city council on consent.
Great, thank you. And then, sorry, one more follow-up on that. So SB 1000, the police radio encryption, that's moving forward. I understand there's very little opposition to this bill, which is surprising. I think the state's sheriff's association is the only major group that has come out against it. And I guess, so at our council meeting, when we addressed this a couple months ago, I know the language was changed a little bit. I remember in my motion, it was to endorse. That language got modified to support. What's the, I mean, I guess what's the difference, and what now would it take for, I mean, is it worth then trying to step that up to an endorsement, and what would that require?
Mr. DeLuca, did you want to address the support versus endorse, just kind of how it's perceived in Sacramento?
Absolutely. So support and endorse would be about the same thing. I think there's different levels of support. You're the sponsor, so it's your idea. You're working directly with the author's office. You're helping draft amendments. You're leading the charge. You are very active. You're the lead witness in committee hearings. So that's a sponsor. And then if there's more than one sponsor, you'd be the co-sponsor. The next step down would be support, where you're listed as a supporter. And so we've got the city down as a supporter for SB 1000. I know the author's office was extremely appreciative of that. And we've had some discussions with them and other supporters about a plan to help move this bill forward.
And the city submitted a letter that's also helpful for what Mr. DeLuca is mentioning about the conversations he's having.
Yeah, I did read that letter, and I appreciated that, especially the city being able to get that out as quickly as we did before the committee hearing. So, Mr. DeLuca, then, on your kind of professional opinion, no difference between endorsement and support, no need for us to move this. Okay, great.
Correct. You're good on that. And then also, council member, regarding the camps bill 1737, full-time employees will be mandated reporters. Full-time employees.
Full-time.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess, so a camp counts, like a summer camp counselor, even if they're, so I guess here's a question, if they're full-time employed over the summer, is that considered a full-time employee?
Let me go back through that, and then after this meeting, shoot you a note, copy Ms. Gaines on whether it's full-time or 960 hours or like PPT or what have you.
Yeah, thank you. That seems like in that area, there could be a huge gap. Okay, thank you, Councilmember Tanaka.
Yeah, thank you. So I have a question for staff, because I don't think we have a representative here today. But where are we at in terms of getting federal funding for the infrastructure from the infrastructure bill for our grade separations? Do we know like where we are in that process?
Loaded question. That's why I'm making that face. Let me see if Ripon is on before I type in. Okay. So we have requested some funding for the planning efforts related to grade separation, as well as VTA submitted a federal earmark to Congresswoman Eshoo, also asking for planning funding related to the cities of Mountain View, Sunnyvale, and Palo Alto. So there are those steps in terms of making sure that we have the projects that are ready, because the larger infrastructure dollars would be things that we can tap into once the projects are closer to ready for construction. So Vanscoic is actively watching all the funding sources that we could get for that, but that's about as far as I can contribute today.
Okay, because I know that the infrastructure bill had, it's 1.2 trillion, right? So it's a lot of money, but is there like, what do you know the steps that we have to take to try to get some of that funding for our grade separations? Of course, probably, approved plan is one of them, but I'm just trying to think of what else besides that. And what are some of the deadlines so we kind of know what we need to do on our side?
Yeah, Vanscoic is actively watching that. Part of it is just the assigning from the approval down to the right agencies that will distribute the funds, and then the notice of funding availability. So that's Vanscoic keeping an eye on those specific pots of money that will be relevant for our grade separation projects. Then I can get an update from them and share it with the committee. Okay, I think that'll be great to know, especially the timelines, right? So especially from the infrastructure bill, because that's already approved funding. So what do we have to do at what point? Yes, absolutely. And we've actually brought on board another group called California Consulting, who is helping us with some of the compliance on these federal grants, as well as an opportunity for us to apply for those funds when the money becomes available. So we are casting out as many lines as we can to make sure that we don't miss opportunities to ask for the money, knowing that it's such a huge infrastructure project for the city. Okay, great. Thank you. And then what's
what's the plan around, the past, well, not just past month, but since the beginning of the year, our stocks have been kind of, I think we're down like almost 20% now. Inflation is record high. Some of our local companies like Tesla and Google are down like 20%. Netflix nearby as well, lost 70%. Facebook's down 40%, right? A lot of people are having hiring freezes right now and their layoffs beginning. And the profitability of a lot of these companies are also falling. There's been 29 layoffs since the beginning of April from smaller tech companies as well. So I guess what's the plan here? Because interest rates are rising, and I'm worried about our economy, right? Our economy seems to be faltering a bit. Do you know what's happening on a federal level to try to help us here?
I do not have that information, but I can also request that from Van Scoyoc if there are specific things they're monitoring in that regard.
Okay. Yeah, because I think one of the things I heard about is the R&D amortization, which is especially painful for smaller tech companies because you have to amortize the R&D spend over 5 years versus expensive directly in the year that's incurred. And so I know that's been an issue. So I'd love to know what's going on there in terms of trying to roll that back, because it makes it hard to do a startup when you have to pay a big tax bill on profits you didn't actually make. And then, I think the other kind of issue is, definitely with trade, right? That's also going to be hindering the economy. So I think that's another thing that would help our tech companies would be more free trade, because especially with some animosity with China and the higher interest rates, we're getting a slowdown in our economy. So I think we need to take some concrete steps to counteract some of this, as well as some policies that make it easier, in terms of the company formation. And I think there's also some work that's happening in terms of carried interest for venture capitalists, and that's going to also discourage venture capital investments in startups, right? So all this stuff is not good, especially as the economy is slowing down, to be putting these in place that make it harder to do innovation in our area. So I don't know if you can help follow up on that, or if you know the answers to some of the stuff, but some of the stuff kind of makes me worried about how do we keep innovation here.
I think you hit it, that those are things I can ask our lobbyists about in as much as they can provide. I know from previous updates, they haven't given all of the specifics on the interest rates and all the aspects that you mentioned, but what they can provide, I will follow up with the committee and share.
Okay. The other one that I was kind of interested in is the global minimum tax, because that also discourages companies from moving stuff back to our country. And so I think I'm also interested in knowing kind of like what's going on there as well. But again, I'm throwing a lot of requests at you, so I realize that you may not be able to answer, but maybe the representative can answer, or
Yeah, thank you.
I don't know what the plan would be, but.
Yeah, and there may be limitations on all the information they'll be able to follow up with, but I will ask the questions.
Okay, great, thank you.
You're welcome.
And let's see, the other area is on a state level, which is, so in general, I like some of the bills that are coming down in terms of the open meetings. I think having virtual meetings, Zoom meetings, being able to participate remotely is more inclusive. Actually, I think it's more transparent as well. And it's better for the environment. So I think it's good all around. So I'm glad to see some of the steps that are happening to enable this. So I think that's good. And so I guess what I'll be interested in is maybe for the chair here to have a letter that perhaps you could draft and send off. We could send off as to the city council to approve, just to show our support for some of this, so that we can kind of move to modern era, right? So that they know that Palo Alto is supportive of having virtual meetings in support of being able to participate remotely and be more inclusive, better for the environment. But I want to, I'm thinking about making a motion, but I just want to get the chair's thoughts about this, and if there's a way for us to show some support on these bills, these pending bills.
I'm fine if you want to make the motion, though. I think traditionally staff would draft that letter. I don't think it comes from the chair. Is that correct?
Correct. So if there are specific bills, as Councilmember Cormack was referencing, that the committee would like to support, if you included those in a motion, we would compare that list against our legislative guidelines, see what's covered. We can work on letters for those, and the others we would take to full council. But
Okay.
yes, you would not have to write the letter. Mr. DeLuca and his team and myself will work on that.
Okay. So in general, I'll tell you the basic concept. I think there's bits and parts I like of each bill, but I think it's hard to craft a letter from the dais here. So, and I think, so I'll express kind of my opinion, and I can see if I could get a second for this. But I think what we want to do is we want to show support for the assembly bills that allow virtual meeting, to allow this kind of technology that we've been using successfully for the past few years during the pandemic. And so, I'll make it simple that we write a letter of support for the assembly bills that are supportive of virtual meetings, and that we want to enable this as much as possible. So maybe I'll just leave it simply as that and see if I could get a second.
And Councilmember Tanaka, was it your intention to specifically call out certain assembly bills?
I
could-
think all three of them kind of are in the right direction. The basic principle behind this is just to enable this. I think this is the future. We talk about how climate change is a existential threat to humanity. This is one good way of trying to get towards that. It shows leadership. But again, that's probably too much to have in motion. I think what the clerk wrote here is actually pretty good. So if you want to put all three bills in there, you can. But the basic idea behind this is to show support and hopefully speedy resolution to some of these bills.
Staff, is this clear enough for you to be able to then go back to the guidelines and know which bills to support after discussions with Mr. DeLuca?
My understanding from this is there would be interest in supporting all three of the open meetings bills. Want to make sure I phrase those correctly, virtual meetings bills. And so if that's not the case, I would prefer the committee to let me know if there's preference of one bill over another.
Do you have any preference, Councilmember Tanaka?
I really don't. I mean, it's more the spirit of it. I mean, there's parts in each of them that I think are good, but it's just basically trying to encourage this adoption of technology. I think it would help everyone's productivity and also make it more transparent for everyone. So that's the basic idea. So I'm not necessarily partial for one bill versus another, but just trying to usher this along.
Okay, I mean, I appreciate the more specificity that we have there now, actually citing the bills. Yeah, I'll second your motion. Do you want to speak to it?
No, it's okay. I just did. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, no, I agree with Councilmember Tanaka. I think the pandemic has shown our ability to operate in a digital world. We're here in the heart of the Silicon Valley, and the fact that we still I think a lot of our government practices are still almost kind of medieval in many ways, and would like to see us be able to adopt technology to be able to move us into the future, especially where the rest of society is. And I think especially a lot of this kind of just comes down to safety. I mean, we've seen the safety of our own members being attacked, and so and as well as local council members. So I think these are good bills for the city to support.
Just a clarification on the language for the motion. I'm looking at the legislative guidelines and I'm positive that they don't cover all the virtual meeting participation. So I think this one, we can write it specifically as a recommendation to the city council to send a letter. I don't even know if we need draft a letter. Just entrust us to take care of what you need to do and support the bill. Yeah, and that would be a recommendation to the city council to do so. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that. And I'm wondering then on, was there another one in this list that addressed? Maybe not.
There's also the Cortezi Bill. I'm checking the number, which is about kind of a code of conduct during meetings.
SB 1100.
And for SB 1100, this committee did recommend that one for the city council. So I will just include that with the update. You did that at the last legislative update.
Okay, great, perfect, thank
It's
you.
hard to get some of your follow-up things scheduled to city council discussion.
It's packed agendas.
Yes.
And then also just to kind of dovetail on what Ms. Gaines was saying, when we write the letters, we'd make them specific to each bill and highlight what the city is doing or specific thoughts. So it's not a generic form letter. It's got clear points and it's got the Palo Alto voice behind it.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Cormack.
Thank you, Chair Stone. I will not be supporting this motion. I am not in favor of 1944, as I said earlier, and our council had robust discussion on this exact topic. So I think it's appropriate for it to go to council for discussion. I think 2449 has some potential. I don't see any reason we should bother to spend staff time on 2647 if there's no opposition. That doesn't seem like a good use of our staff's time or our consultant. Does the chair anticipate that this motion should capture all of the ones that we want to look at? Or are you taking them sequentially?
We can
So
include it into this motion.
I'd be interested in adding 2181. Was that already covered under what we've previously given staff direction? Okay.
Keep listening. I'll check
Keep
while you're
listening.
listening.
I'll keep talking and you keep listening. Or listing? Okay, yeah. Okay, so I would be interested in having us, having the council support Assembly Bill 2181. I think I'd certainly be interested in hearing our representatives' thoughts on the proposal. So that's what I would add to this. And then I will ask the chair to split this motion when we vote on it. Are the maker and seconder willing to add Assembly Bill 2181?
I'm okay with that.
I'm not at this time. I don't think I have a clear enough understanding of that bill based on the information presented. So if you want to offer it as a friendly, looks like you. Oh, sorry, as an amended motion.
Okay, maybe it'll be do you want a second motion? I guess I'll offer it as an unfriendly and then seek a second.
I'll second.
All right, I don't think I need to speak to it further.
Yeah, Councilmember Song.
Okay. So can you guys hear me? So, I've heard quite a few issues with VTA. As some of you guys know, I take a lot of public transit myself, so I'm a bit of a connoisseur of public transit, and definitely there could be improvements. It looks like this is an attempt to try to get more accountability. So in general, I'm supportive of that. I don't see too many downsides of it per se, but maybe there are. But I at this point I don't see it. So I think trying to support it seems to make sense to me.
Great, thank you. And I'll just briefly speak to it. I mean, I'm not saying that I would not support this. If this came to council, I'd like to learn more about it. So hopefully then we'll be able to get a little more information. Any Councilmember Cormac, was there anything else?
I just,
Nope. Okay.
Sorry.
And
Chair
then,
Stone.
sorry, yes.
Sorry about that. I just wanted to clarify that the legislative guidelines do not cover this subject matter. So this would definitely be one that the city council would have to give us direction on.
Yep, understood.
And I think clerk, I think this is an amendment, not a motion.
Yep. So we'll vote on the amendment. When you're ready, clerk.
Councilmember Cormac,
Yes.
Councilmember Tanaka,
Yes.
Chair Stone,
No.
motion passes.
And I think then I would then, so while we're doing it, like to propose that we add support for Mr. DeLuca gave me that follow-up. Support for AB 1737. That's the child camps bill. If the maker is willing to accept that.
Give me a second to read it carefully.
Yeah, not a problem.
I will support.
Great, thank you. So that will be incorporated into the main motion. Councilmember Cormac.
In reviewing the argument in opposition, I wonder if we should, I'm trying to remember, Mr. DeLuca will remind me of the phrase like conditional support or support with amendments. There's some way to phrase this. Can you remind me what that is?
Absolutely. So support if amended or support with amendments.
Okay.
We would make specific amendments. But yes, that's the phrasing. And we always recommend, so there's support if amended or oppose unless amended. Our firm, we kind of come from the school of thought of support with amendments is a better way to do it. You're ingratiating yourself to the author's office. They know to work with you because support would be coming.
I'm a big fan of positivity, so I agree with that approach. I think we just might want to consider, it looks like there's an opportunity to improve the enforcement mechanism. And so I think we just might want to be cognizant of that.
Yeah, I appreciate that feedback. That's good feedback. Okay. Any further discussion? Okay, no. Can the clerk then want to split this motion? So,
One clarification too.
Oh, yes.
For the, okay, it moved. Never mind. I wanted to make sure that the one that was added to your main motion was put up there as opposed to with the second amendment. For 1737. Does that reflect the intent of adding 1737? We just want to make sure it's put in the right place.
sorry?
So the support with amendments that you just offered for Assembly Bill 1737, the maker and the seconder, you were okay with adding that to the main motion, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
Yep, that
So
was
is it
accepted.
reflected properly on the screen?
it is.
Okay, thank you.
And then Councilmember Cormac, you wanted A to be split?
Yes, please.
Okay, and I will split
So
C.
we'll have to vote on them
so-
all separately.
Yeah, so we're going to vote on all of them separately. Fortunately, there's just three of us.
Just to give the clerk more time to, for splitting A, are you saying you're splitting the three bills or you're just doing a vote on A separate from?
Vote
a
on
vote?
A separately.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm filibustering a little bit to make sure my
not a
headline
problem.
has enough time.
We could talk about the San Francisco Giants.
I could talk
Beautiful
about other
ballpark.
bills if you all want.
So is the intention to do a vote on A, then a vote on,
Vote on A, then a separate vote on B, then a separate vote on C.
okay.
And technically B was not, it was a friendly amendment that Councilmember Tanaka accepted. So that's just incorporated into the main motion. All right, well done. Thank you. So go and we can call the vote then. So starting with A.
Okay. Chair Stone,
Yes.
Councilmember Tanaka,
Yes.
Councilmember Cormac.
No.
Okay. Motion passes. Motion B. Councilmember Cormac,
Yes.
Councilmember Tanaka,
Yes.
Chair Stone.
Yes.
Motion B passes. Motion C. Chair Stone,
No.
Councilmember Tanaka,
Yes.
Councilmember Cormac.
Yes.
Motion passes.
All right, wonderful. Thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. DeLuca and staff for this. We'll move on to item 3.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night. All right, we'll move on to item 3, our last action item, Office of the City Auditor's presentation of the building permit process review report. Welcome, Mr. O'Rourke.
Good evening, Kyle O'Rourke, City Auditor. Pleasure to be with you all this evening. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and it's our pleasure to discuss the building permit process review report with you this evening. I'm going to turn it over here in a moment to our lead on the project, Matt Bubness. But before we do that, I just want to give a special thanks to all of those that were involved, Mr. Late's team, as well as the city manager's office, Ms. Noze, and the city attorney's office. Thanks very much to everyone involved. It requires quite a lot of effort to bring these projects to a close. Tonight, we're going to present the results of the building permit process review report. We'll have time for questions, of course, at the end. We have quite a number of recommendations in the report, and for purposes of the presentation, we've summarized those into 3 broad themes, which Matt will cover here in a moment. And with that being said, I will go ahead and turn over the presentation to Matt. And Matt, I am sharing my screen and controlling the PowerPoint, so feel free to give me a nudge if I'm not moving slides at the right pace.
Great, it helped if I unmuted myself there. So thanks, Kyle. Appreciate that. And I just want to reiterate Kyle's thanks to Jonathan and the PDS department in terms of their cooperation and support going through this process. As you can imagine, it takes a fair amount of time to get the information we need. And then also the departments that support the building permitting process as well, to making sure that we're getting the full picture as well. So like Kyle said, we're going to go through the project background and then really focus in. Overall, we had about 15 observations and recommendations, but there was a lot of kind of common themes, especially when we're talking about the recommendations in terms of supporting improvement of the process. So we're really going to focus in on those kind of three more high-level observations and recommendations, and then we'll also hit a few more of the highlights of some of the 15 as well at the very end. And then, like Kyle said, we'll open up for question and discussion as well. So, Kyle, if you want to hit the next slide. There we go. So in terms of the project background, really the key objectives for the audit activity were identifying the highest impact areas to focus the assessment. As you can imagine, with the number of different building permit types and also the inspection process rolling into this, we wanted to make sure that we were focusing on the areas of highest need and best possible areas for us to look at in terms of offering meaningful recommendations. We documented the building permit process itself, as you can see in the report that we posted up online for this meeting as well. And then also looking at the operational performance of the department against industry best practices, and then also the peer cities as well, which again is included in much more detail in our report and which also informed our recommendations that we made. So then you can see the high level flow in terms of the right-hand side of the screen as well. A fair amount of planning goes into this, but really it's more about the organizational business process analyses. We went through 6 kind of major phases in terms of producing the observations and then leading into the recommendations, including detailed data analysis of the building permits and the inspections, doing extensive staff interviews with folks from PDS and also those supporting departments I mentioned, looking at business process review of the building permit process itself. So actually going through mapping out those processes to look for gaps, looking at organizational analysis, a customer survey, looking at building and contractor association feedback as well, and then also that benchmarking I mentioned. And again, this led into the report that we shared with the committee prior to this meeting as well. So, Kyle, if you want to hit the next slide. Just a little bit of context before we get in the observation and recommendations. So these are the submitted permits by year and type for the last 4 years. A little bit of variation and fluctuation that you can see there, unsurprisingly related to the pandemic in 2020 in particular. So looking at approximately 4,000 total permits in 2018 and 2019, dipping down to I think it was about 3,000 in 2020. Then again, ramping up to near pre-pandemic levels in 2021, about 3,700 permits overall for all types of building permits across. I believe it's about 40 to 50 categories. So. And then the next slide, Kyle, if you want to hit that one. There was a fair amount of questions about photovoltaic, dealing with the head cold here, so it's a little hard to enunciate tonight. About PV, we'll just go with the abbreviation for it, building permit volume here. As you can see, that has increased a fair amount over the last 4 years, the corresponding period from the prior slide, from a little bit under 200 permits up to over 300, approaching almost 350 permits in 2021. Again, really to kind of set the stage a little bit, the processes don't differ significantly depending upon building permit type. It really just depends on which department might need to be involved for expertise.
Yeah, Mr. Bubnis, your audio is kind of comes in and out and is a bit disrupted.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'll try to speak up a little bit more. So apologize for that. Is that better now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, sorry. The head cold and trying to lean in here a little bit more. So my apologies. The PV projects, we focus in a little more in particular in terms of the benchmarking and some of the other analysis, because that was some areas of key concern that were mentioned to us by council members and others. So you'll see some of those references included throughout the report and some of the analysis as well. So just wanted to set the stage for that as well as a part of this presentation. Kyle, if you want to go to the next slide. So again, like I mentioned at the top of it, really wanted to focus in on these 3 kind of key observations and recommendations. They were findings number 1, 2 and number 8, if you're referencing back to the report that we shared with the committee beforehand. The first finding is really about decreasing the lead times for building inspections. Currently, or as of the date of the report, you were looking at approximately a 2-week lead time to get an inspection, when really you're talking about several days or preferably a day or two for a lead time in terms of more industry best practice standards in terms of requesting those inspections. Again, with contractors trying to schedule stuff, that can cause problems and be problematic for scheduling and proceeding on time with projects. So our recommendation there really revolves around hiring an additional inspector to help decrease those lead times, just with the volume and kind of the persistent lengthy lead time related to the inspections. We felt that was really the best and most feasible recommendation in terms of other viable options out there in order to help decrease those lead times. With the second finding there, customers and applicants need better information on all aspects of the permitting inspection process. Really, this is one of the more, I'd say, broader ranging themes of the 15 observations and recommendations overall. Really, with the quick pivot to the online permitting system that the department had to do with the start of the pandemic, really going from a complete in-person intake model to a complete virtual intake model. There's some catch up that needs to be done in terms of having better and more up-to-date information online that's available, as opposed to being able to rely upon a physical person at the development center in order to answer questions. And again, that's something the department acknowledges, but we've identified a number of observations and corresponding recommendations to help with that information. And we feel as though a lot of the other observations will be helped and supported by the better dissemination of data and improved ways to collect information through the online permitting system or something similar, depending upon what comes down the pipe at some point in time. The final observation recommendation that I really want to highlight is talking about how the department is operating underneath an outdated strategic planning model. The blueprint, I believe, was adopted if it was either 2011 or 2012. Again, that's fairly old, especially given the fact that the pandemic really forced the department to completely kind of flip on its head in terms of how they operate, in terms of going to that completely online type of environment. And while we acknowledge and understand that going through a strategic planning process is very lengthy in order to be comprehensive, we really want PDS and we really advise them to keep in mind that they really need to think about what that strategic vision of the department looks like going forward as they start to make some of these updates to their technology systems, thinking about how to shift staffing potentially in order to meet some of the other recommendations as well, because they need to be cognizant of what that future vision of the department is going to look like as they start to make some of these tweaks in order to kind of, address some of the more low-hanging fruit issues that we have identified in the building permitting process review. If you want to go to the next slide, Kyle. So again, this is a complete list. We have 2 slides here of all of the observations and recommendations. I won't belabor this too much further. The one thing here is talking about the OPS functionality, which is the 3rd bullet from the bottom. Again, this is one thing that is more of that kind of low-hanging fruit potentially, but it also will involve staff time. It's really the ability to enter information real time into the system as opposed to entering it into a PDF type of form and then submitting it to the department and then having them have to hand enter it into the system. Again, it's all about trying to increase and improve some of the technology and the functionality with the systems that are currently being utilized. Another one on this page too is updated and really creating better policies and procedures for the department as well. But this will be an evolving process as well. As they start to improve processes, they will have to go through and better documentation of those as well to really make sure you have continuity and consistency if you have staffing changes as well. But again, it's one of those things that we want to keep in mind as we go forward with making changes with the department as well. Next slide, Kyle. And then 2 kind of highlights on this one is thinking about training of staff, in particular the project coordinators. As designed within the blueprint strategy that I mentioned earlier from 2011, 2012, the project coordinators were kind of supposed to be kind of a one-stop shop for questions and answers, kind of citywide in terms of questions that an applicant might have regarding the permitting process. But now it's kind of more of an intake function, and really some of that training needs to be kind of brought up to speed in terms of those project coordinators to kind of better serve that role. The other one here is thinking about kind of what the overall staff model of the department should look like as well. With the pandemic, it's kind of exacerbated the issue with being able to retain contract staff that are relied upon for some of the functional areas within PDS. And again, just for continuity and being able to have adequate staffing for some of those areas, one of those considerations that should be kept in mind as things progress in terms of making some of the recommendation changes for the department. And I think that was the last slide then, Kyle. I don't know if this is yours as the city auditor here, Kyle, or
Yeah, I can cover this. So I guess the next couple of slides are sort of standard items. And this actually should say policy and services action, but what we're asking of you all tonight is to recommend approval by the city council of the report, which of course we'll get there in a moment. I think the next slide is sort of questions, which of course it's coming. Before we, I guess, jump to questions and discussion around the report and presentation today, I just wanted to kind of highlight our process. As we wrapped up the audit project, we did present the audit findings to Jonathan's team, Ed in the city manager's office, and the city attorney's office, and had robust, candid conversation. And ultimately, Jonathan's team did, for the most part, you can see, have agreement with our findings that are ultimately in the report. So we did come to agreement on sort of next steps, and you can see our both our recommendations, but also Jonathan's corrective action plan moving forward and the tentative timelines for implementation of some of those corrective actions. So very much appreciate both the efforts on the audit and their efforts to close out the audit report. But with that being said, I think we're ready for questions and discussion.
Great. Thank you, Mr. O'Rourke and Mr. Bubness, for hanging in there, even with the head cold. Very well done. It's always tough to do.
I tell you what, Mr. Chair, if you don't mind, perhaps I could ask Mr. Late, or I could just do a quick snapshot on management responses.
Yep.
That were worthwhile. Mr. Late, would you like to make any comments?
Just to reiterate that well, thank you to Kyle and his team. It was a pleasure to sort of go through that experience and have Matt really do a deep dive into our operations and identify those areas that are included in the report that's before you. As Kyle noted, we had a good discussion about the findings and the management responses. For the most part, agree with the recommendations. We continue to still be in a bit of a transition, and so I think our responses reflect that, and I think that we're making progress in a number of areas that already. That have been flagged. So I'll leave it at that and happy to answer questions. City Manager Chicago may have some more that you'd like to add.
Sure. Maybe just with that to pick up from there, a couple of specifics and in the context of perhaps the budgetary decisions that were made, even dating back a couple of years as we went into our pandemic response conditions and made the transition to online permitting. Really pretty remarkable, I must say, to have implemented this new system really in response to, or as a response to shutting down, and given that, along with the staffing reductions that were taken, recognizing the fiscal conditions, I'll also want to acknowledge the work by Planning and Development Services through that really difficult period. So that said, I appreciated Mr. O'Rourke's reference to candid conversations, which we have had over the last several weeks and months. The particulars of the audit have proceeded. Really would hold this audit up as an example of the good work that the audit Auditor's Office, along with staff, can do when really, as has been noted, taking a deep dive on issues and then really looking at options and solutions. As Mr. Late pointed out, we do have a number of areas where progress is underway or has already been made. There are a few references to additional staffing that have been approved as well as proposed in the upcoming budget. And in fact, I don't know that we mentioned it specifically, but we have authorized an overstrength or two overstrength inspector positions to be recruited immediately in anticipation of the council's approval of the upcoming budget. So once again, I think it has been a positive experience in identifying key areas for focus and allowed us to make progress on those specific items. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Let's go to public comment if there is any.
No hands are raised, Mr. Chair.
All right. Thank you very much. We'll come back to the committee for discussion. Councilmember Cormack.
It's a lot of C's. Thank you, Chair Stone. Good evening, Mr. O'Rourke. Welcome, Mr. Bubness. I have to say this is, the city manager was just referencing this as an archetype of your thorough and thoughtful work. I definitely learned some things. I want to start by complimenting the strengths that are listed on page 42. This is starting to become a habit, but I'm going to go ahead and read them out. This is the strengths of the city. So specifically in Mr. Late's area, quick adaptation to a remote working environment. This is the conversation that the city manager was just alluding to. Prompt to make improvements when opportunities are discovered. I think that's a great description of a learning organization, and a high level of expectations and work ethic. I think this is one of my favorite sections each time of the audit, and I think it's important that we start with that. I appreciate the survey. I think 250 responses is fantastic. Thank you for the full page of questions about all of the interviews that were offered. The flow charts were enlightening and scary, I think, at the same time. And I think it's entirely possible that, those loops, who knows how long some of those loops go on. But one of the things I learned was the variety of building permits that we require and offer. I think if I was quizzed before reading this audit, I would not have said that we had as many as we have. So I feel like I do at the Utilities Advisory Commission. I'm always learning something. I'm also looking at, pages 98 and 99, and I'm using the packet pages here. Poor Director Late, I think every single time we get a complaint in the council email about something, they go to him. But when I look at this, it's not so bad for the additional permit application requirements. But when I look at page 99, we probably just hear from every single person who's unhappy. And I don't know that we hear from, what looks like the majority of people who are either neutral or satisfied. So it's always good to get data in addition to the anecdotes that we get in our emails. I did want to talk a little bit about the timing of management responses. 2023 seems like a long time from now, but the reality is it's probably going to take a year to hire people. I'll just let the clerk know we're losing this particular thing repeatedly, and it happened last night as well. It's only disconcerting to us. Everyone else is probably fine. It just goes on and off, et cetera. So I feel like I'm losing you, but you're not. You're here on the little screen, which is just as well. Just give us a moment in case you wonder what's going on. So just to the timing of management responses again, having the strategic plan not be until 2025 seems like a long time from now, but I am the one who has given Director Late like a hard time in past years for having aspirational targets. So this one looks like it's a reasonable one. the staff, perhaps in the communications department, even poor Megan, she always gets dragged into these things, who can help with the FAQs and providing more information on the website. That sounded like a real opportunity. And having been the kind of person who has to do an audit on information, this is a real benefit that the audit team has provided, is that fresh set of eyes clicking through every page and trying to figure out, if I was going to navigate through this, how would that work? So really appreciate the effort that went into that. One thing I don't know, so the number one recommendation, and thank you to the auditor for, pulling out 3 from the long list. How many inspections are needed for each project? Does it differ by the kind of permit? Just trying to figure out how bad 2 weeks is. Is that something that happens once in a project? Does it happen 10 times?
Yeah, so I can speak to that, council member. There's a lot of inspections depending on the project. New construction could have, a dozen or more, discrete inspections, foundation, electrical, plumbing, it goes on and on. And 2 weeks is way too much. And so, and that's actually kind, 2 weeks, because we actually fell off that mark, I think, after in this audit, and I think you've received some of those emails as well. And we can speak to that. I mean, it's explained in the audit why we would get to some of those conditions. But yeah, 2 weeks is far too long. We would like to be closer to 24 to 48 hours. We used to be within a 24-hour next day kind of scenario, and that's our aspiration to get back to that.
Okay, I think that's probably a point that's lost on people who aren't involved in the process, that there are multiple inspections, which means that 2 weeks is really going to compound over the life of a project. And I know you're aware of the problem, and yes, we certainly get those emails. Let's see, strengths. Appreciated the suggestion about checklists and, and the thorough review of what other cities are providing. I think combining that with the FAQs and putting the information in situ when someone is filling out a form, I think that's definitely a best practice, and I appreciated that. And then I guess the last thing, and I think we probably touched on this a couple times during budget discussions from long ago, cycle times, just reducing cycle times in general. Is there a target? Is there a KPI that the department would like to move towards? Is that a different way of thinking about not just fixing problems, but what we want to achieve and what people could expect?
Yeah, absolutely. And when you say cycle times, you're talking about, I interpret that as, what is our turnaround time when an application comes in to a city response back to the applicant?
Yes.
And we definitely have those timelines. And for, and it depends. The more complex project, the longer it's going, the longer the lead time. It ranges anywhere from over the counter to as much as 45 days, depending on the complexity of the project. Most residential developments, new homes, are within a 30-day review period for the first round of review, and then it gets lessened for the second and subsequent resubmittals. So we have that, we track that, and as we've reported previously with our electrification efforts, we're even doing that at a finer level with our electrification permits as well.
Yeah, I was happy to see that our heat pump permits were up in 2021, but it looks like they're like 110 or something. So I know we definitely have a ways to go on that. And then I guess just my final comment, I was certainly touched in on the audit, is the difficulty that your department has having to interface with our other departments, utilities, public works, et cetera. Mr. O'Rourke or Mr. Bubness, I mean, not sort of implicit in some of the recommendations, but any thoughts you have on, how we as a city can make that more seamless and not put all of the onus on PD and PDS?
I think it really relates back to technology enhancements in order to be able to share the documents. One of the specific recommendations talks about a plan sharing software called DigiPlan that was put into place pretty quickly as well, along with OPS, in order to be able to share those rather, voluminous documents back and forth. And again, I think between enhancements to that and other notification systems within OPS to let departments know when the information needs to route to them for their review, and making sure that those processes are very solidified and firmly in place, and that there's some routine check-ins from the project coordinators, I think that will significantly improve that relationship back and forth. So
I think there's probably also an opportunity for everyone who's participating to see sort of the time clock, like how much time do we have left to respond to this, so that it's less I have a task that's been sent to me and more I'm part of a team that's trying to, get this done in a reasonable time frame. And that may already exist. I'm not sure, but my experience is sometimes when you have things segmented, people are only seeing their portion and not realizing the impact any delay in their area might have, in terms of compounding. Well, again, job well done. I certainly appreciate having the auditor spend some time on this area where we get complaints and seeing which are, have some basis and getting a better understanding of the department's strengths and opportunities. Thank you.
Councilmember Tanaka.
Yeah, just wanted to thank you guys for putting this together. It's actually the source of a lot of my office hours. So I'm actually glad that there's an audit on this, and it was really comprehensive. So I'm quite impressed, actually. So wanted to ask the auditor to see if for the number of permits that we have compared to the amount of staff we have, how does that compare? Do you have any idea?
I don't believe we have specific benchmarks in terms of, that ratio.
Okay.
Jonathan, I'm not sure if that's something that you track separately.
I don't have that information.
I would just note that we had quite a lively discussion of that topic as a part of the audit to try to see if there were benchmarking or benchmarking information could be developed as a part of the audit effort. And I think Matt may want to chime in on that point, but it became clear that getting apples to apples comparison was somewhat problematic.
Yeah. And I'll just say, I mean, in a previous role of mine, I wrote best practices on performance measures for the Government Finance Officers Association, and we were very hesitant to rely completely on benchmarks. It's kind of a first good start to maybe gauge where you're at, but it can be somewhat misleading or dangerous, like Ed said, in terms of apples to apples kind of comparison, or like I used to say, it's more like, Red Delicious versus Fuji apples in comparison here, as opposed to just apples versus oranges. But I will say, in terms of us looking at the benchmark cities that we pulled some data for, you're looking at much more residential communities for some of the comps, but then also looking at a much larger city like San Jose, who actually just decided to go wholesale with having their permitting process be done online, and essentially eliminated their development center. So it makes that kind of true comparison a little more difficult. And
at the risk of stating what might be obvious, Councilmember Tanaka, I just want the record to show we actually asked for the benchmarking, and the auditor said, no, didn't think it would quite fit here. So just to be clear on that.
Okay, well, I support you in getting that information. I think we should do it. I mean, it may not be perfect. It may be, because the cities are different sizes and the mix of permits are different. But in terms of just kind of baselining where we are compared to others, whether we're woefully understaffed or whatnot, it would be good to know. So I support the city manager's effort, and so the city auditor can do that. That would be really nice. It doesn't have to be terribly comprehensive, but maybe for nearby similar cities like Menlo Park and Mountain View, if you could just see how does that compare, that would be very interesting. So I was trying to think back to my own personal permitting experience, and it was just my water heater. I know a lot of people don't even bother to get permits for the water heater. I mean, when they're replacing them, but I did, and it was actually a pretty long process. And and this was just a water heater, which is fairly routine, I think, for a lot of people. And so and if I was to kind of summarize a lot of the and if for the folks that are interested, you guys can go to my Facebook page. I live stream a lot of my office hours, so you could go there and you can see a lot of them are actually on building permits, and what you'll get when you watch them, if you are interested, is there's kind of like two areas of complaints. So one of them I think is captured in the survey, which is length of time to get permits. So it's a hardship for a lot of folks because they're renting another property, trying to move into their house. There's contractors who get delayed because contractors have a certain schedule, and if they can't keep working, they have to go on to another project. But the time to get the inspections is a real hardship for a lot of people. But it seems like you guys are trying to address that, so that's great. But the second area of issues is inconsistent answers. Depending on which inspector you get different answers. And I know from the perspective of the tradespeople or the project owner, it could be very frustrating. And I experienced that a little bit about myself, even in my own little water heater project. So I know it's hard because people have different opinions, and I don't think this is intentional, but it's just something that happens because it's not necessarily the same inspector on every project, and maybe the notes or what was said is not necessarily carried forward to the next person, but it makes it a little bit difficult. So I think it's a little bit harder one to solve, but it's something which I think is important for us to solve, so that kind of like the frustration level that people have is not as high. And so wanted to ask the auditor in terms of, and I liked how you kind of compared us against a few other cities, but there's a trend to do a lot more of this online, so you don't actually have to have like for instance like San Jose. What's your thoughts about how much of that, just to kind of reduce the staff load and make us more accessible? How much of this do you think we could actually do successfully, given where we are right now?
Sorry, Councilmember Tanaka, are you asking how much of the process can be done virtually?
Yeah, exactly.
So, I'll be honest, this is somewhat of a tough question to answer, and I'd be curious if Jonathan has a comment on this. This is actually why some of those dates are further out. Essentially, what we're recommending is that the department gather data over a 12, 18-month period to ascertain what public expectations are in terms of the virtual versus in-person experience, and then leverage that as an opportunity to reposition department practices to orient around customer needs. So not yet known. Of course, we're mentioning circumstances where much, if not all, of the process is done virtually. But whether or not that will meet Palo Alto customer needs is not yet sort of determined.
Okay, I've in my many office hour chats, I've talked to some folks who do business inside of Palo Alto as well as outside, and some of them have been quite enthusiastic about doing more virtually. It's like faster. It's a way to get more done with less people in terms of you don't have to have people driving all over the place. A lot of us have smartphones, and you can turn the video on, and so there's a lot of things that can be done that perhaps in the past you really had to drive there. So anyways, I think this is just in terms of how do we, it's easier to say, oh, we want it to be better, but there's only so much funding. It's nothing to actually have a way to do it. And it seems like technology could be a way to do it in terms of allowing us to cover more territory and have a better response time, yet still keeping the quality going. And so it's maybe a way for all of us to win. One other thing, and I didn't see this in the areas of recommendation, so I wanted to ask the auditor, what was your findings here? But a lot of customer service organizations, they have some sort of support ticket tracking system, like Zendesk, where they will as people, so like we kind of know the length of time that ticket's been in the system, so that, so alarm bells go off if, it's someone fell between the cracks and it's been 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, since they got a response. But I didn't quite see that in this. And what is the auditors, given the work that you did in terms of looking at other cities, what was your findings in this area?
Are you asking sort of the level of transparency within the technology and whether or not something like that would be beneficial?
Yeah, so it's actually fairly common these days to have some sort of ticket tracking system where what it allows the management to see, like if there's been a request and it's been sitting in the queue for a long time, for the action to be taken. And every kind of request is tracked, right? And it's not lost. So I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with this, but there's a lot of these ticket tracking systems. Zendesk is just one of many. But I was talking with the city manager, and he's mentioned that that's not something we do currently in the city. But I was wondering, how common is this in other cities? But I know it's really common in private practice, but I don't know about private sector, that is. But I don't know what you guys found with other cities in terms of, what are other cities doing in regards to tracking tickets and support requests?
I'm not certain, I'll let Matt chime in if he has a specific response in terms of comparison to other cities. I do believe, though, that the technology that's implemented does have some level of transparency. I don't know that it gets to specifically where an item is routed, but you'd be able to track when a request was submitted and have transparency as to where it's at in the process.
Okay, well, maybe it is done. I just misunderstood. Okay, and then
that is the case. I'll just chime in with Kyle that they do track by who it's assigned to and the number of days it's been with a person.
Oh, okay, good. I guess maybe our conversation was just inbound email in general. So maybe that was this distinction here. Okay, and then last item here is, I liked how you guys did a survey. It was actually quite interesting. Yeah, because definitely I agree with my fellow council member that, the emails we get people don't usually email us like when things go well. We only hear from people when things go bad. And so it was definitely interesting to see the numbers here, right, in terms of satisfaction with the permitting process. So I look at this on page 59. It shows 12% extremely satisfied and then 19% extremely dissatisfied, and then you see 25% satisfied and then 24% dissatisfied, right? So it's there's definitely I think room for improvement, but it's not everyone's dissatisfied, even though that's pretty much only the people we hear from, actually, at least that I hear from. But one other kind of thought I had, and I know that this is also something that's commonly done in the private sector, is some sort of automatic follow-up with customers to see how the experience has been. So it's commonly known as a net promoter score, asking them how likely are you to recommend the service to someone else. And this is almost the standard now in the private sector, especially with retail. So almost all retailers do this, where if you make a purchase or you have some sort of interaction, send some sort of follow-up asking how likely are you to recommend the service. And I'm not sure if you guys heard of JD Powers, but it's kind of a organization dedicated towards customer service. And if you have a JD Powers award, it means a lot in terms of providing great customer service. And one of the tenets of customer service is to get constant rapid feedback. So I know we did this one survey, and I think it was good that we did it, but we only do it once in a blue moon. Versus kind of the standard private practice now is to, as soon as the service is rendered, you ask, what do you think, right? And that way it's more timely. And then you don't kill them with a 20-question survey, or 15-question survey, like in this case. You ask them one question: how likely are you to recommend to someone else? In fact, a lot of times they even have it on the pin pad when you swipe your credit card, so it makes it super easy for people to give feedback. And but what has his auditor's experience been compared to other municipalities in terms of trying to get something like this going?
I would say from my experience, this is not a common practice in the public sector. Not to suggest that it wouldn't be a useful practice in this case, but not something that's widespread.
Okay.
Council member, I'm happy to chime in here. I know this has been an area of interest for you for quite some time. We've had some conversations about this. We've been a little bit slow in getting something rolled out, but I can tell you that I anticipate within the next 2 weeks, we will have something very similar to what you're talking about being available to our customers. And you're probably familiar with at the in our emails, when we send out an email, it's got our signature block and it's got the link at the bottom to provide a survey, short survey. We're doing a department specific set of surveys, 3 of them in particular. One focused on our inspection services program, another focused on our development center operations, and then a third one that covers all the other aspects of our operation, planning, administration, and so forth. And I was actually just looking at the final draft of those surveys today. So I'm going to have another meeting internally with our IT and communications office, and expect that we'll be able to attach those specific links to our email. Further, I'm also intrigued by getting that rapid feedback, particularly in our inspection program. And we're working through our vendors now to figure out how we can send an automated response after an inspection has been done. First, it'll show up on email, but we want to get it sent to cell phone. Like, professionalism, timeliness, those types of things. So we're working on that as well, and we hope to have that rolled out as soon as we can make those adjustments.
Okay, great. I'm really pleased to see you guys are trying to make something happen. That's great. My only recommendation is I know like there's a temptation to get more data, but just really all you really need is one question, which is how likely are you to recommend this service to someone else? And it's a standardized skill. In fact, the nice thing about asking the same question is that there's a slew of data on this, and then you could benchmark this against other organizations and kind of know how it goes. And this is like SurveyMonkey has it. I mean, pretty much all the survey vendors have it, and so it's a good way to. It makes it very easy. If you could get people to fill out 5 questions, that's awesome. But it's sometimes hard because people are kind of busy, and then what happens is if you have 5 questions, the only people who fill it out are people who are really mad at you for some reason. So you get kind of biased. So you got to make it super easy for people so that you hear the good as well, right?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I will just note we are, one of our questions benchmarks to the rest of the city survey questions. So we'll have that continuity throughout, for the department to the city operations as well.
Yeah.
I understand your point. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. And then just to be clear, so are you saying this? So as soon as the service is rendered, you send an automatic email just asking how was the customer service? Is that basically how it works?
That's for our inspection program. When an inspection has been, so our inspectors can input the results in the field, and when that happens, we will send an email automatically when that happens.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think
kind of action.
I want to be fully supportive of what you guys are trying to do. So that's great that you guys are making this happen. So thank you.
Thank you.
Great. And I appreciate all the work and the thoroughness of the report as always, and nice to see the cooperation and the partnership as well, and the teamwork here. So thank you. All my questions have been answered. I also thought it was interesting. I think Councilmember Snock was talking about the pie chart on 101. I mean, clearly the 2-week delay is unacceptable, and I know staff is working on that. But I thought it was interesting to see 47% of people going through that process find that we're better or the same as other jurisdictions, even with that delay. So I do think that just kind of speaks to the professionalism of the office and the work that we do here in Palo Alto. So I appreciate that, and definitely room to grow as always. And I think these recommendations are all make perfect sense. So I don't have anything further. Would anyone like to make a motion? Councilmember McCormick.
Happy to. So we need to refer this to city council, right? That's what we need to do. That's not what's in there. Yeah. Recommend to the city council that we review and accept. We have to accept it, right?
Yep.
The report. Yeah. The building permit process review report, corresponding recommendations for improvement.
Okay. And I will, Councilmember Tanaka.
Actually, can I ask a quick question in regards to this motion?
With regards to the motion, yes.
Okay. Just back to what the planning director said in terms of trying to get a system to get rapid constant feedback. Is this already budgeted, or do we also need a budget towards this, or is this already taken care of?
Director Late, you're on mute.
Sorry. Thank you, Chair. If I can answer that question.
Yes, please.
Thank you for asking the question, Councilmember Tanaka. This is sufficiently budgeted within our department.
Okay, that's fine.
System management.
Perfect. Okay, I'll second it.
Actually, just one clarification. I believe there is one proposal that's in the proposed budget. John, could you confirm that, or do you recall?
Well, there's a number, but specifically with respect to the surveying that we talked about, that's not, there's not a budget request for that. I am asking for, I don't know how deep you want me to get into this, but in recognition that, as it was discussed here this evening, the interest in having more technology serve as, we've clearly understand how technology is a part of this permit process now. And we're finding that we're spending a lot more time on that interface with our customers. And so we do have a position request that we're making for our data team. We also have another budget enhancement that we're requesting to implement some of the implementations of the audit that you just went over.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no other lights.
May I speak?
Yes.
Briefly to the motion? Okay.
Oh,
So
sorry, yes.
no, I do just think it's incumbent on us in accepting this report and our colleagues, should that happen, that we recognize the timeframes, right, that we're agreeing to, and refrain from, expecting these things to be fixed overnight. So I think that's an important part of us, taking responsibility for it. Just a brief response to the earlier discussion about surveys. I could not disagree more that one question is sufficient. I think in order for the department to get accurate information about any changes or improvements they might need to make, I think it's more than appropriate for them to ask more than one question. So I'm glad to hear that the plan is to ask 5, even on the brief surveys.
And Chair, I know you're ready to wrap up here. If I would like to respond to the timeline comment, if I may.
Please do.
Thank you. So thank you, Councilmember Cormack for that. And I appreciate your paying attention to those timelines. They were intentionally placed or identified to reflect what we believe to be reality in terms of what we're able to get done based on our resources and the multitude of other things that we have that we're processing. But I want to also share with you that many of the recommendations that are included in this report are currently underway. We have checklists that we're going to be able to launch really soon with our electrification efforts. We are having ongoing conversations with our communications and IT office to have fillable forms. The website is something that we're looking at as a way to improve information, not only on the building permit side, but also in other aspects of our policy efforts and housing and things like that. So a lot of the thing, and the inspection process, of course, is underway, getting new inspectors. Many of these things are an active part of our workflow, and I would expect that we would be able to meet, beat these timelines in many ways. But I also I'd rather under deliver, or what's the expression that under promise and over deliver. So that's the goal here with those timelines.
Councilmember Tanaka, you'd like to speak to your second?
Sure. Yeah. So I really appreciate your guys' work on this. Sounds like you guys are trying to make it happen. That's great. I agree with Councilmember Cormack on the timeline. Definitely sooner the better. I know you guys are trying. There's a lot of other things going on, so appreciate that. Yeah, just in regards to the number of questions, as someone that used to do a lot of marketing, I used to like really relish in asking lots and lots of questions and try to get as much data as possible. But if you actually look at the philosophy behind Net Promoter Scores, because there's a trade-off in terms of how much questions you could ask and how often will people fill it out to get the survey fatigue kind of situation going on. And what they found is fewer questions, of course, get more answers. And getting a consistent stream of feedback is actually far more important in terms of customer service. Not to say long surveys aren't good for other things, but in terms of customer service, a constant stream of feedback is by far, constant stream of timely feedback is far more important than the number of questions. Although I know it's very tempting, but anyways, there's a bunch of YouTube videos on this. I would encourage you to just go to YouTube and type Net Promoter Scores and you'll learn more. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And seeing no further discussion, if the clerk can call the vote.
Chair Stone,
Yes.
Councilmember Cormack,
Yes.
Councilmember Tanaka,
Yes.
motion passes.
Great, thank you, everyone. And that brings us on to our final piece of the agenda, future meetings and agendas. So Ms. Congains.
There's a lot of work to do, and you have one more meeting before the break. And so next month, you'll have your race and equity quarterly update, a few audit reports, and maybe one other report is what is anticipated right now. We had something on there as a follow-up for the affordable housing work plan that you've given staff, and that'll actually come in the fall. So that gives you a sense of what is planned for next month.
All right, thank you very much. Well, thank you, everybody, for tonight's discussion, and we will adjourn at 9:28 p.m.
Thank you.